Welcome to Saturday Night the Movies. I'm your host, Steve Rubin. Our producer is Ben Shrewsbury. Joining us are in alphabetical order, Danny Biederman, co-author of The Incredible World of Spy-Fi, international attorney and litigator Malcolm McNeil, who owns one of the largest collections of James Bond memorabilia in the world, action-adventure author and spy film buff Steven Kobrin, whose latest thriller novel is The Man from Belize, and last but not least, an Academy Award-winning special effects makeup artist, designer, writer, director, producer, Robert Short.
So what's going on, James? They say you're finished.
What do you think?
I think you're just getting started.
I have kind of an observation here about these last 5 pictures with Craig that really I'm curious to hear what the panel thinks of this, because it's something I had a real problem with. And it was very simply this. What really bothered me about the Craig films, as much as I love Craig himself as an actor, is I could never really stomach the whole concept that these 5 films kind of seem to be sort of like an epic saga that were all very intimately linked to one another. And I couldn't handle that because Bond pictures really, for me, are meant to be standalone adventures. And that's what made them beautiful, and that's what made them brilliant. And the fact that Casino Royale ties very intimately all the way down straight to No Time to Die, and all the 3 pictures in between, it feels like one picture spread out across 12 and a half hours. And for me, I just never really liked that approach for these films. And I'm just wondering kind of what everybody thought about that.
Malcolm, what do you think?
I'd like to weigh in a tiny disagreement on one, and that would be Skyfall. Skyfall felt like it stood alone. But I agree with you entirely. It was almost like it was forced in between to attach each to each other. And I think Casino Royale was probably the sexiest, if you will, if we can say that about any of them, because of the relationship that he had with Eva Green and how there was that element. But it seemed that when they got to Quantum of Solace, it all went away. There was nothing going on with Olga. Okay.
Right.
And then when we got to Spectre, I liked Spectre the first time more than I liked it the second time. Sort of the same thing with No Time to Die. They didn't create that additional reverberation of wanting to see them over again.
Come on, Bond. Where the hell are you?
Bob, what are your thoughts?
I come from the standpoint of I was so glad that they actually killed Bond in No Time to Die, because it meant that that whole universe was wrapped up.
Right.
In watching the Craig films, it was amazing to see Daniel Craig, an actor of his caliber, bring what he did to Bond, but the universe that he existed in didn't work for me. And there was something terribly wrong from the time of Casino Royale. In watching the Craig films, where he's connected to headquarters through an earpiece, and he's basically like a remote control agent having to take orders from headquarters, something was terribly off with the interpretation of how Bond functions. And then we got to the Brofeld foster brothers section, and at that point I was like, I don't know how we got here, but we need to go somewhere else. So when they tied it up as the Craig films as its own universe and ended it, I was so relieved. I was like, I am ready for whatever you've got new coming up. But that 15-year arc for me just wasn't firing on all cylinders. Every film got more and more human and more personal and more emotional, right down to the very end.
Yep.
It was like, it wasn't the Bond that I grew up
Absolutely.
on. And I make no excuses for that. It just simply wasn't the Bond that I grew up with. And I certainly know people who love the Craig universe. That's one of the fascinating phenomenons of Bond, is that it's like no matter how they change it, there's still a fan base that a new generation that embraces him. But for me, Craig was a terrific actor. I thought he did wonderful stuff with the character.
Great.
But the universe that he was in, no thank you.
Danny, you want to chime in on this discussion about the Craig films?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with what seems to be, I guess, a consensus here, especially now that that's over with and looking back at it. I'm really not happy with what they did for the same reasons that Bob and has just mentioned. I think the fact that they were all connected, I felt that was a very weak connection, especially when it went to Quantum of Solace. I just felt like they said they were doing a trilogy or something at the time. And I hardly saw a connection until the very end of the movie. It just, the whole thing felt weak to me. And then at Spectre, with the end of that and how they tried to link everything together, I thought was kind of lame.
It was me, James. The author of all your pain.
I was happy when Spectre came out only because the barrel sequence was back at the beginning of the movie. And then I thought, I don't care how bad this movie is, I'm just happy it's opening that way. but you know, looking back on that, I think they're all pretty weak. I think Casino Royale, I thought was the best of the bunch. I thought that was a really good movie, like really excellent. But I grew up on the 60s films, and it got to the point when I was watching the Craig films that I was just getting really tired of them. I'll also agree that Daniel Craig, I think, is a phenomenal actor. And I think he did a great job in these movies. I really, really do. But I got to the point, because of how the movies themselves were going, I got tired of seeing him in the role, even though he was a good actor. And I just longed to see Sean Connery or George Lazenby again.
Thanks to artificial intelligence, we may still see those guys again. You never know.
Everybody needs a hobby.
So what's yours?
Resurrection. You don't have to worry about me.